Good afternoon. Welcome back to the founder stage here at TechChill 2022. My name is Bathke. I'm an entrepreneurial freelance journalist. I work for Deutsche Welle, among other publications, and I'm excited to be sharing the stage for the next 35 minutes with two experts in their respective fields to discuss the topic of foreign affairs in the digital age. Now, joining us remotely from Cambridge in the UK is PhD researcher at the University of Cambridge, Tomass Pildegovičs. I hope I didn't mispronounce your name.
Perfect.
Good. Okay. First hurdle taken. And right next to me here on stage with me is Amit Bogasia. He works for HTT Pool, and contrary to popular belief, HTT Pool is not in the coffee business, although they really serve some really delicious bee coffee, I heard here, just behind this wall at the coffee station. But they actually work with platforms like Meta and TikTok, and specifically, Amit is a client partner. But maybe we can talk about his role a little bit more in a little bit as well. Now, to get us started, we hope that we can complement the previous discussion as much as possible. There's some overlap, so forgive us if that's the case. We'll try our best to add some value and provide some, have a vivid discussion. Now, if you, the tech team, could please put the tweet on the, yes, could you maybe make it a little bigger if possible? If not, then no big deal. Now, quick show of hands, who has seen this tweet or something similar? I think that's the vast majority, yeah. And it's not really surprising. So you probably know the story about Snake Island and the Ukrainian soldiers stationed there being threatened by the Moscow warship, which was later sunk, of course, and them saying to the warship, go after yourself, right? And later they were freed in a prisoner exchange. Now, I'm not telling you this to make sure you're not asleep. Okay, maybe that was also something I wanted to do. But, and I'm also not telling you this to remind you that less than 1,000 kilometers south of here, there's still an unprovoked war of aggression against the Ukraine by Russia, including atrocities that amount to genocide. No, the reason I want to tell you about this is something that we already kind of discussed and touched upon on the previous panel, namely the information war that is being waged, right? Because war is long evolved out of just something that's analog on the battlefield, but has entered the digital realm. And so that's what we're here to talk about. And with that, I want to throw the first question at Tomass. And I'm glad actually that the previous panel didn't go into too much detail there. But I want to talk about the information war. And Tomass, I want to ask you what you've been observing in terms of what Ukraine's side is doing with Zelensky versus Putin, and who do you think kind of has the upper hand so far, 2 months into the war?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Sveicien Riga. I think that Russia's ongoing aggression against Ukraine has placed us at a historical crossroads of sorts, not only us in the Baltic states, but also the collective West and beyond. To kind of directly answer your question in terms of what we can learn from Ukraine in the context of the information war, in terms of what Ukraine has been doing over the past 2 months, I think two things primarily. First, as referenced by the ship that you put up, the role of symbols in building narratives during an information war. I think that the iconic image of the ship, which has been turned into memes, into postage stamps, into advertisements, it's a prime example of that. These symbols and kind of individual personified stories of heroic resistance have succeeded in both mobilizing Ukrainian society, which for obvious reasons it's important, it's key to activating the sort of total defense approach, involving every member of society in the defense effort in order to raise the costs of any Russian attack or occupation attempt to an unbearable level. It has also mobilized Western and international support for Ukraine. So in other words, Ukraine has successfully instrumentalized these symbols to ensure that every Ukrainian, every citizen of Ukraine understands what they're fighting for, why they're fighting, and why it is worth it. And I think by contrast, Russian troop morale remains low. The Kremlin's narratives about denazification of a country with a Jewish president remain unconvincing, to say the least. And there are numerous instances, reported cases of Russian conscripts or entire units refusing to follow orders. So very simply put, after 65 days of war, Ukrainians know and understand that they're fighting for life and death, while Russians still don't know why they're fighting.
Right.
And I think...
Go ahead, yeah.
Maybe one more short point. The second thing we can learn from what Ukraine is doing is the extraordinary power and role of leadership in strategic communications. So while for various reasons, Western observers and pundits were skeptical about President Zelensky, his commitment to reform, his integrity prior to the war, I think that in the past 2 months, he has shown a masterclass in crisis communications. So he's been appealing to people directly, refusing any evacuation efforts, refusing any, fancy suits or outfits, and he's communicating directly from the zone of conflict, which again is a stark contrast to Putin, who he has shown himself to be isolated, gloomy, angry, communicating from behind absurdly long tables, clinging to them. He looks to be in poor health. Of course, this is a matter of speculation. So I think the contrast is striking, and it bears significant ramifications, both from the information war and from a kind of stratcom perspective.
Okay, great. Thanks for getting us started here. Now, I think, as you said, when it comes to certain parameters, or at least Putin's objectives when it comes to the war, keeping Ukraine out of NATO and invading the country, the whole country in a short period of time, I think those all those objectives he has so far failed to achieve, and on the contrary, he has propelled countries like Sweden and Finland to actually to join NATO probably very soon. But I want to talk maybe about, in terms of the impact and the information war, to the platform level, because you can say that it's been winning hearts and minds, of course, when it comes to users. But I guess there's something called, that we all know, called confirmation bias. So if we we show solidarity with Ukraine, we think that it's egregious that Russia is invading Ukraine, then such a tweet that will probably there will be even more sympathy from people who have already a lot of sympathy for Ukraine. But on the other hand, if it's somebody in Russia who is a nationalist or just supports Putin's cause, then it maybe has the opposite effect. Or if it's a tweet from the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs saying that there was or the massacre in Bucha was staged, then that will in turn maybe increase their support. So I want to bring Amit in. Tomass claims that basically that Ukraine has been winning the information war, right? But on the platforms, does data back up Tomass' claim?
Yeah, I would say there are partly, when we are based in West, sure, we feel like the information war has been won, but in reality, around this time, there's been a complete blanket ban on Russia and Ukraine by platforms, so that's why advertisement and all things cannot happen. The information war is not won. No matter what you see, no matter what you hear, it's far from that. Why? Because it's not fought where we are. We are based in West, so we feel from this perspective that most of the English-speaking, German-speaking, French-speaking world, we feel that we are in this bubble, that everything is looking good from our perspective. That's because we are not being targeted by this misinformation. In this case, we've seen a big spike from BRICS. Those are like Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the solidarity for Russia. The reason why that happens is because in this case, we've noticed a lot of things that this disinformation has certain truths to that. Why those BRICS countries, they have, I think it's not, I'm saying any secret, but it's very blunt that they have deep-rooted antipathy towards the West, and they're more sympathetic towards Russia. that's one of the reasons why those misinformation, disinformation targeting is working and it's more effective there. And to that extent, just because we are not in effect being targeted with those things, it doesn't mean that it's not there. So this is what I can say from the platform's perspective. However, if you see how those platforms are reacting to it, there was, like, we've never seen before such coordinated effort from all spectrum. They might compete themselves, like TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, but this time around, they were all very fast to move and block everything that came out of Russia or from Ukraine. Of course, there was a spillover from a lot of information getting outside, but they were more user-generated, and when you draw an engagement graph done by individual researchers, it was that this time around, there were not many state-backed from Russia directly, but it's more about the network which were elsewhere, which were allowed to go.
Okay, thanks for that input. I want to talk about the role of platforms here in a little bit. So that's a good segue, but one more follow-up question for you then, because you said, so I guess it depends on the countries.
Yeah.
But then on a country-by-country level, can you actually measure the impact in terms of public opinion that's being swayed and so forth? Is it possible, if not on a global level, where Ukraine versus Russia, how they square up, but maybe on a national level, can you say, okay, maybe in BRICS countries, Russia won? It's a very simplified way to put it, but in other countries, Ukraine won. How do you measure impact?
It's very hard to measure, to be honest. It's a fair question, but in general, even including the platforms, people, and government, they all are struggling with the same question, like who is generating this content? Where is it coming from? They all need to know that. It's very hard to pinpoint because of the diverse nature of the content being produced and who and what the motives are of those people who produce it. So it's at this stage very hard to say, it's very hard to grasp it, but in case where we see that the reaction from users themselves when they're using these platforms for the good part, we can also say about that the audience generally in the West this time around, they were very clear in their message about being, we are supporting Ukraine in full solidarity, and everything happening in the war was bad. And this was user-generated, grassroots level, across the spectrum in the West that we've seen. I personally have never seen like that before. Interesting.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think the war in Ukraine has changed a lot of things, obviously, for everyone around the world, has repercussions for most people. Okay, moving on to the role of platforms, and we already started talking about it. So of course, as most of you probably heard, platforms like TikTok and Facebook, and basically all major platforms have been criticized for enabling the spread of misinformation. Of course, that's not new, but in the context of war, of course, it receives a renewed and higher attention. So just to give one example, there was a very recent report from Voice of America that said that TikTok, there's a lot of pro-Russian false information being spread about the Ukrainian war, and it does have a tangible impact on young people's perception of the war. So I don't know who wants to go first, but I mean, can you specifically talk about TikTok a little bit? Sure. Or Tomass, maybe you want to start with if there's merit to this criticism. I don't know who wants to go first.
I can say a bit about the platforms. So when
maybe specifically about TikTok.
Specifically about TikTok. Okay, so if I want to say first thing, like each time there's something about the platform which is up and coming in general compared to what the roots and everything are. I want to open with the statement that non-stupid people who actually can make a difference about what's happening, they really underestimate the power and danger of stupid people. So
non-stupid people underestimating the power of stupid people. Okay.
And talking about this, in this case, how the platforms are reacting to it, like all the content being produced, they were, I'm not saying generally pro-platform or anything like that. We are as well in here all about being, person to person. So when it comes to what these platforms have done, they were fast enough to pick out which are those 49 to 50 Russian state-backed accounts, what kind of content they were producing. They were fast enough and swift enough to close them down. This is from TikTok policy guidelines. We've seen that they have disbanded and discovered 6 networks with about roughly 250 accounts that they publicly recognized. They were state-backed and not necessarily from Russia. There were a wide spectrum of content being produced for specifically about war and misleading information, so they were fast enough to move and close them. This is what I can just quickly comment about TikTok, perhaps from the point of view of as a user, not necessarily of each platform, but you have to keep in mind why that spreads. So perhaps Tomass had something to say about this from his point of view, because his research is also very interesting on the same spectrum.
Yeah, Tomass, feel free to comment on this. Yeah, and also maybe you can answer the question if there's merit to this criticism. I mean, we'll return to this question because that's been basically since 2016, since the meddling in the U.S. election, the criticism of platforms, whether they're doing enough, and it's like this perennial criticism, basically.
Sure. I think when we look at regulation from a more geopolitical context, I think an appropriate analogy in the case of Europe would be that our house is burning and we're now trying to take out an insurance policy on the house. So we're now finally, as the flames are, rising to the second floor, we're now trying to kind of appreciate the great urgency of the moment all of a sudden. I think that over the past 2 years, Europe has faced now 2 really transformative security crises. Of course, the nature of the challenge being completely different between a deadly virus and Vladimir Putin. But there is one crucial, very dark common denominator between the 2 challenges, and that is the kind of rampant, widespread, coordinated spread of hostile disinformation. So whereas in the context of COVID-19, disinformation campaigns sought to kind of undermine the people's trust in their governments to do the right thing. So it diminished people's trust in restrictions, in the safety of vaccines, and in the end, millions of people in Europe and in this country made reckless and irrational decisions about their health. So we can say without a doubt that hostile foreign disinformation contributed to both excess hospitalizations and countless preventable deaths. In the context of Ukraine, the Kremlin's propaganda machinery is working in overdrive to justify Putin's unprovoked act of aggression and sending, thousands of Russian people, many of them untrained conscripts, into this deadly war. When we talk about platforms, I think that online platforms and tech companies need to take a stand by proactively suspending those accounts that justify or kind of glorify this act of aggression. Much more resources need to be dedicated to supporting local fact-checking initiatives. I think that the point to stress is that really any tech platform that complies with Putin's censorship requests is in a way complicit. It's an accomplice to Putin's aggression. And I think one point that maybe rings especially true from a Latvian perspective, I think that a point that is frustrating is that online platforms do not dedicate comparable resources to combating disinformation in lesser spoken languages. So while, for example, Google and Facebook have now, armies of people scouring for disinformation in English or in French, disinformation is slushing across all corners of the EU. And I think that is maybe another vulnerability that deserves further attention.
Okay, so that's actually, I would like to pick up on this point about what you just said toward the end about, I think you could be described as not paying enough attention to the local context, right? When it comes to languages, I think a prominent example in the past was virtually no or very, very few Burmese speakers doing moderation in Myanmar, right? And then the Muslim minority being targeted, among other things. And I think there were actually killings, etc. And there's not anything that was being stopped. So Facebook actually, enabled. I guess it's, you can say that these hate crimes. And so, just to give one example too, in the Ukraine, coming back to the war in Ukraine, because that's something I read recently. There's a bunch of independent newsrooms in Ukraine where that have been had their their ad accounts blocked, and so there's Ukrainian journalist Andrei Borokin. He talked to Coda Story recently about this, and that also speaks to the ad part. But maybe we can first talk about this phenomenon, this criticism, where the local context, where the platforms are not paying enough attention to the local context. Maybe Amit, you can comment on that. Is that something you've been observing? Do you think this criticism is fair?
Yeah, there is for sure some merit to that, and they have to consider how complex the systems work. So when they say the accounts of the journalists were blocked, for example. The reason why it happens because they have, if you put a blanket ban on something, it's hard to pick out which word is allowed, which word is not allowed. Primarily because, as we've seen before, these technology platforms, they're focused more on the tech part, and they don't have in-house, I mean, they do have now, but they don't have a lot of expertise that they hire from outside to figure out what works on the context of the local level and what shouldn't work. So in this case, they are themselves doing everything they can to just completely ban everything, and with this, generally, who have good point of views about grassroots level journalists, they get in the crossfire. There are ways some have actually regained the control over their followership and they have regained their voice back online. However, it takes a while, and since we are working, if it stops once, they have to start challenging these platforms to come back up again. Simple as that.
Tomass, do you want to say something about that too, or do you want to maybe move on to regulation, because you already also talked about regulation a little bit?
I think I'm all right. I'm all right for now, I think.
Okay, well then, I think we can talk about regulation. I think, yeah, criticism of platforms we just talked about. So maybe a question for both of you, whoever wants to go first. Where do you see the need for regulatory action now specifically? I mean, of course, the Digital Markets Act will be enforced later this year, so we can talk about that a little bit too. But maybe from both of your points of views, whoever wants to go first. Tomass can go. Maybe you can go first. Like, where do you see the biggest need, maybe? And also because that's something. Another question I had for you was because you said you go about the culpability of the platforms, but how much should they be criticized versus lack of action on the government side? Or yeah.
Well, I think the need for action is pressing, and now the kind of buzzword, the fashionable buzzword in 2022 has become resilience, and of course it's such a far-reaching and encompassing topic that I think, for lack of time, I will focus on maybe 3 vulnerabilities in resilience that the EU is working toward to address, but perhaps not quickly enough. I think first one is critical infrastructure. I think that not nearly enough is being done to prevent the EU's critical infrastructure from coming in the possession of third countries. So understandably, there's a lot of sensitivity around these matters. It touches upon the kind of sensitive direct interests of member states. However, the kind of foreign screening mechanisms that are already in place have yet to be properly implemented, really. So I think that in light of Russian aggression especially, we can see the costs of being strategically dependent on third countries for the sake of short economic gains. So I think that Germany, Austria, Hungary, these countries are being burnt very, very painfully. Second factor, second vulnerability in our resilience is this phenomenon called elite capture. So the kind of technique of co-opting, corrupting former top-level ranking European officials, putting them on boards of state companies and so on.
The former chancellor, the German Chancellor Schröder automatically comes to mind.
Exactly. So, of course, Russia's maybe the most successful in this, but Russia's not the only actor. China, Saudi Arabia, other countries are very successful in luring over high-ranking European officials, and we can see where this has gotten us. And third vulnerability that I think should be stressed is kind of lack of regulation in the data market. So I think that we're still continue to live in this sort of digital Wild West where these kind of loosely regulated commercial entities can harvest, store, broker, transfer data of millions of Europeans to authoritarian regimes, which contains volumes of kind of sensitive information. So again, I think with a full-blown war going on European soil, the idea of willingly transferring and selling Europeans' data to the very same authoritarian regimes that are trying to destroy us, I think that borders on suicide.
And you said selling data, right? That's what you've been saying. Because that's
harvesting and selling.
Yeah. Because the main conversation has, of course, been about buying Russian oil and supporting indirectly the war in Ukraine that way. I think Germany alone spends 200 million euro per day on Russian oil and gas. But that's interesting from that perspective too. That how that is supporting authoritarian regimes like Russia. So before we break down maybe also the other points or go into a bit more detail, I mean, is there something that you wanted to say, Maybe you can comment too in terms of regulatory action that you've been, what you've been seeing and what you would recommend based on your experience dealing with the platforms?
Yeah, if only I can add a little bit, not much more than what Tomass said. I can say there has been a lot of action about regulating recently, and it will only be much more from 2022 onward. But in general, if the authorities, and in general about the government, if they can define themselves what they need to regulate, I think that would make much more sense. In this case, they need to incentivize these platforms, and not just any platform, but in general tech company, which is it's either collecting data or is it manipulating or kind of using that portal just to spread awareness about something. Here, if they define the regulation in the case to incentivize them, I mean platforms and tech companies to come up and be more accountable, they've been starting to organize and self-regulate. If they are being proactive and they're incentivized to do that, then there is a clear motive for tech companies. I was reading recently about what happened since US 2016, and I found that the topic that people always talk about First Amendment, it's more about free speech, yes, but from the point of view of the individuals. That's what they are defending. But when they put that into context from tech companies and they start expecting from an organization, that's not fair, because these organizations inherently don't have these kind of things to take care of. But we are seeing everyone shifting their perspective. Platforms have no choice. We've seen that recently in the last few years. They are self-regulating. Of course, a lot of work needs to be done, and it's more about like public-private cooperations. Like I think Tomass is hinting in that direction. I feel when it comes to regulation, the goal of regulation is to incentivize self-accountability. So if you see the regulation coming in, instead of telling the platforms what exactly they should do, I feel, in my opinion, that would actually have a better effect, that something will be done proactively from platforms, instead of just saying, you do this and these are the bans that you will get, or these are the things you must do, because that's kind of maneuvering in a way of just blocking everything that's free and impacting your regulation. Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying that regulation like the Digital Markets Act, right, which, as I said, will come back into force later this year, and most of you probably heard of this, and so if the companies, the platforms don't comply, they could face fines of up to 20% of their global revenues. So you think that's less effective than incentivizing them to take steps on their own.
Yeah.
But it's not exactly like they've been very proactive in the past. I mean,
Exactly.
what makes you think that that's still the better way
compared
to something like regulation like the Digital Markets Act?
It's from a point of view of what we are doing as individual users, yeah, it kind of makes sense from that point of view, but from platforms' point of view, you have to think of it from, of course, the fines from a government's point of view, sure, makes sense. There are certain things the platforms must comply with in 24 hours. If they don't, they're fined before, and they will be fined in future. Here, if the point is about being proactive, if they are rewarded that the platforms were flagging this is misinformation, what's the source of it? End of the day, if it's about people, if users feel something which is within their worldview, they will share it, regardless of the source or regardless of what it means and what merit it has. So in this case, it's also about containing when we talk about social media platforms being the cause and effect of these kind of problems, we also have to consider the social psychology part of it, like why people act in that behalf. So again, this is a very complicated question when it comes to regulating. The question is about regulating exactly what.
Right, okay, yeah, of course there's been tons of proposals also, including limiting the number of the reach by limiting the number of in terms of sharing opportunities, like posts on Facebook, like Francis Haug and the Facebook whistleblowers has put forth different suggestions. Let's maybe move to the potential risks of your relation, because we have about 6 minutes left, and I definitely want to talk about this briefly at least. When it comes to overreach, if there's too much regulation, maybe also that's something it's on your mind, but also Tomass, for you, if Facebook feels cornered and it's trying to do too much and it's trying this blanket approach to make sure it doesn't run afoul of any regulations like the Digital Markets Act to also prevent these massive fines, and then having examples like not just like this one-fits-all approach instead of also looking at the local context. So, yeah, can you speak about the potential risks of maybe overreach or of regulation maybe that goes too far?
Tomass, perhaps you want to jump in here.
Okay. I think it's directly in our interest to wield the EU's primary power on the global stage is the power as a global standard setter. It's not our military power. It's perhaps our trading power and our standard setting power. So I think that the impetus for us as the EU and our transatlantic partners to take the lead in developing this regulation, the urgency, again, is enormous, because if we don't do it, others will do it for us. And I think that this entire debate takes place against this kind of very dangerous backdrop of glowing collaboration between authoritarian regimes, autocracies around the world. And I think that kind of two aspects to this collaboration in relation to regulation I find to be most concerning. So one, just from a regulatory perspective, autocracies around the world, China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, are increasingly banding together in international standard setting organizations in these regulatory fora to kind of rewrite the rules, rewrite the so-called operating language of the international order. So I think whether the UN or the International Telecommunications Union or different bodies that regulate the freedom of the internet, any standard setting body, they're forging alliances in dangerous ways. The second dynamic that I think is arguably even more dangerous is that these autocracies are banding together in different types of technology export and transfer. So particularly concerning our, I think, AI and biometric-driven mass surveillance technology transfer. So, you know, kind of inspired by the success of building its own digital authoritarianism, or maybe a cooler name is techno-authoritarianism that I've heard. China is exporting these technologies, artificial intelligence, facial recognition, gait recognition, to autocratic states in Europe and Latin America and Africa. In fact, our favorite neighbor, Belarus, receives a lot of its surveillance technology from Russia and China. And I think that maybe one more point that should not be lost here is that I'm not painting a kind of black and white, good versus evil picture. The West has been really very much complicit in this. Western democracies are complicit in the proliferation of these technologies when it's convenient for them. So, for example, the UK has exported this kind of surveillance and telecom interception technology to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Israel has sold its spyware to Azerbaijan, Bahrain, and these sorts of regimes. So I think that
well, I mean, maybe NSO Group is a private company, maybe not the government itself, right? Or do you mean the government? Because the NSO Group, the Pegasus software, that's something that different governments have used. But do you also mean the Israeli government, or do you mean the NSO Group specifically?
Well, I think that generally governments have been complicit in sort of greenlighting the transfer of these sorts of hypersensitive technologies with national security implications. So I think that ultimately this transfer of technology is demonstrably harmed kind of civil liberties, stifled freedoms, and actually enforced the longevity of autocracies around the world. So I think that if we don't regulate, others will do it for us.
Right. Okay. We have about 2 minutes left. So thanks for addressing that. This kind of new cold digital war, the new digital Cold War, if you will, but of course with different camps, and you with all the terms that you used, very important when it comes to, for example, exporting authoritarian tech. And I think just one example more I wanted to touch on is internet shutdowns, right, as a tool of digital authoritarianism, especially in the context of elections or wars, to shut people off from access to information, which we are also, of course, seeing in parts of Ukraine for different reasons, maybe partly because of the platforms, but so that is a kind of a bleak outlook. But maybe I'm not sure. I'm not going to force you to say anything positive, optimistic, because these are dangerous times we live in, and of course the first war in Europe since 1945. But maybe just as an outlook here, maybe short statements from both of you. In terms of what needs to be done, what you hope will happen, or maybe also what you fear will happen instead. But yeah, maybe 20 seconds each to close off our panel. Maybe Amit, do you want to go first?
20 seconds, right, okay.
15 now.
So end of the day, it's really to overcome individual biases. We heard in the previous panel about cognitive biases. We have confirmation biases. We have to think also about the cognitive biases. That's all I would say. The thing is that each of us have this naive realism. So if we can overcome that, use whichever tools you have in mind. Don't be stupid.
Okay, Tomass, final thoughts?
I think to conclude, in the context of what is going on, in the context of Russia's aggression, I hope, I pray that we do not fall victim to this highly Eurocentric perspective when we speak of Russia's isolation. The fact that Europe and the United States has imposed sanctions against Russia does not mean, unfortunately, that Russia has yet been truly isolated globally. Kind of China, India, many countries in Latin America and Africa have not to the full extent condemned Russia's actions. And I think that rallying the world's democracies in a meaningful way, it has to be the challenge moving forward. So, in the words of Benjamin Franklin, one of the kind of founding fathers of US democracy, either we will hang together or we will hang separately. I think that is the challenge moving forward.
All right, let's try to hang together then. A round of applause for our panelists, Tomass and Amit. Thanks for your attention, and I hope we were able to provide a thought-provoking discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tomass.